If you're a beginner to color pencil drawing, there are some big mistakes you could be making that have a significant impact on how realistic your drawings look. And learning to draw with colored pencils is a challenge. So in this video, I'm going to go over 3 of the biggest mistakes I see beginners make. And probably the biggest mistake that I see beginners making is not spending enough time on your drawings. And when I really think about why that is, on why beginners aren't spending enough time on their drawings, that you haven't learned how to develop the skill of critiquing yourself. Critiquing yourself is a core fundamental to learning how to draw realistically. And as a beginner, you're not going to be critiquing yourself as much as a more experienced artist would. Another factor that I believe to be quite common is rushing yourself. Drawing with colored pencils takes a long time. And to be able to draw a realistic drawing, you need to have a lot of patience. Now, what can you do to help yourself out with spending more time on your drawings? First is take breaks, and I mean lots of breaks. Every time that you feel like you're really frustrated with your drawing, that's a good time for a break, even if it's just for 5 minutes. You can also draw in smaller time frames. When I'm drawing, I draw in about 2 hours each session, and I take a 15-minute break between that to help with bathroom breaks, as well as just taking a break from staring at the same thing for so long. I feel like when you stare at the same drawing for so long, it becomes almost impossible to see the mistakes. You really do need to give your eyes and your mind a break and stare at other things for a while before you come back and look at your drawing again. And I can guarantee that the next time you come back to look at your drawing, you're going to be seeing things a lot different, especially if you go to the next day and then come back and look at it. That's oftentimes better to separate out a lot of your drawing time between multiple days. I don't mean skipping a day, that's bad. You don't want to be skipping days, because then it becomes foreign to you and you've kind of lost the mentality of what it is you're drawing and how to layer and what you're basically doing to get the results with maybe fur that you're working on. But otherwise, separating out between multiple days and looking at your drawing and critiquing it, trying to point out the differences between it and maybe a reference you're using, or just looking at your overall, trying to figure out which values are wrong, what details are wrong, what you could do better. Looking at it on a different day is really going to help you pinpoint a lot of the mistakes that you were making that you didn't notice before. I draw at a more slow pace than I think a lot of artists do. I mean, not everybody, but we're all different. Some artists can draw faster and maybe get in as much detail as I do in a quicker amount of time. That's fine. You don't have to be like everybody else. The goal is to find your process, what's going to work best for you, and the time frames that are going to work best for you to be able to achieve the details and the level of quality that you need with your drawing. And I like to say that in the final stages of your drawing, when your drawing is all filled in, you may not have it done per se, but the whole entire, all of the areas, all the background, everything is totally filled in. That is like the most ideal time to be noticing all of the mistakes with your drawing, because now you have everything coming together to create that realistic drawing, and you are able to see much better the differences between the values that you have and then any mistakes you have with some of those details as well. So I actually will spend a lot more time trying to fix a lot of different little mistakes here and there for a lot of areas of my drawing. The next mistake that I see a lot of beginners making is not doing enough layers. To get the proper colors and values with your colored pencil drawings, you actually do have to get quite a bit of layers in there. Now, there are some exceptions to some subjects, like white wolves, for example, or other white animals, where there's actually not a lot of layers for the colors involved, although those are the more difficult types to draw just because there are less layers, which means that the layering that you do has to be more minimal, and you have to know just how little of what color to add to get the right values, and that also build up the structure. But I often see people doing their layering with very little colors to them, so that the end result drawing is way lighter than it should be. Now, this isn't a horrible problem though. It's actually better to be way too light than it is way too dark, because being way too dark, that's gonna be a lot harder for you to try and fix. Whereas being way too light, that just means that you're not finished yet. You need to add some more layering down to get those values darker, as well as bring out those highlights. So if you're not sure if you are not doing enough layering, just take a look at the reference you might be using and your drawing. Now compare how light your drawing is compared to how dark the reference photo is. And usually yours is going to be lighter than the darker reference. And this is just because you haven't gotten enough shadows in. And probably at the beginning of your drawing, you haven't gotten your base layer down good enough with making sure that the values closely match what they're supposed to be for the highlights, because with colored pencils we usually have to work from light to dark because light colored pencils don't go over dark so well. So then all you have to do after checking your values in comparison to your reference is just pinpoint specific areas to work on first. Don't work on the entire thing as the whole general area. You're just gonna end up overwhelming yourself. It's always better to focus on working on smaller areas and trying to get those done or close to done, what you can judge at the time it's done, and then move on to other areas and worry about those. And then once you've gotten through all of the general area of your drawing, you've worked through every little tiny area, then take a step back and re-look at or critique the entire drawing itself again. There are also lots of different techniques to layering your colored pencils with your drawings. It doesn't mean that everybody's method of their layering process is wrong. It just means that there are some layering processes that might work better for you versus somebody else. And speaking of layering and drawing tips, in the November issue of Colored Pencil magazine, this month features my artwork on the cover and an article about me inside where I offer some drawing tips. You can get yourself a copy at coloredpencilmag.com. Another mistake that I see beginners making is actually choosing the wrong blending method or paper, depending on how you want to look at it. What I mean by this is that a lot of people tend to do the old-fashioned burnish blending method, where you take the colored pencils and draw over the top of other colors to press really hard and blend those together. And people often make the mistake of choosing a more textured paper type. Now, burnish blending doesn't work so well when you're working with a more textured paper because it's quite difficult to get all of the colored pencil down into all the crevices of the tooth of the paper. There's also the fact of the differences between oil-based and wax-based colored pencils though. Oil-based colored pencils have a harder core, and so they're going to have a harder time getting into all the crevices of that paper regardless of how much pressure you apply. Now, when you upgrade in the type of quality of the pencils that you're using, this greatly diminishes and doesn't matter so much, but there still is a slight difference. Wax-based colored pencils are typically softer than oil-based, and so they're going to have an easier time smoothing into some of the crevices of the paper. But if you're using solvent to blend with, it doesn't matter what type of colored pencils you use. Oil or wax-based, it's all the same because it breaks down the binders of both pencils and distributes those pigments into all the crevices of the paper. And oftentimes beginners end up choosing a medium type of paper, or a new type of paper is released and they try it out for themselves, but they're doing burnish blending with it. So therefore it's a lot harder to try and get the pencil down into all those crevices of the paper. And then they write off the paper as being just bad and horrible for colored pencils. And really, if you were using solvent to blend with, you wouldn't have any issues with a more textured paper. I have used medium textured paper with a lot of my high detail drawings. The only drawback though is that you can't get precise hairline details, but that doesn't mean that you can't get photorealistic drawings from them. This is probably a more controversial opinion because I know that some people will always just say that the paper sucks even though they choose to blend with burnish when they could be using solvent. And really, it is up to you. It's your choice. You're entitled to your opinions and what you feel about what you try. This is just my opinions on what I see going on with people and my own experiences with the paper types that I have used. For my graphite drawings, I always use medium textured paper. Why? Because it's going to hold a lot more of the medium. I'm going to be able to get a significant difference in better darks using a more medium textured paper than I would if I used a smooth type of paper like I usually do with my colored pencil drawings. If you are a beginner, using solvent to blend with just makes things so much easier, from the paper choices not mattering so much, and using solvent also allows you to be able to add colors in more minimal increments, which works great for beginners so that you can correct mistakes easier. Learning to blend with solvent isn't too complicated. What takes more time to learn is how to blend and mix and choose colors, along with all the complicated aspects of learning how to draw realistic looking animals, like how to draw fur, feathers, skin texture, and a lot more, which you can learn loads more about how to do all of that by watching my real-time tutorials, where I take you step by step through the drawing process. My tutorials are for any skill level. Learn more about them and sign up at patreon.com/JessicaMatheny. There's a link right here on the screen, and I will see you in the next video.